It's pretty clear that we're currently in a phase where we want to make everything flat and simplistic. The word minimal describes almost everything on the web and on your phone today. But honestly, why? And will it even stick around for much longer? To find out, we're gonna need to go back. Back to 1983. Imagine if you were put in charge of designing the UI on the first personal computer. Where do you even begin? See, this was a time where you had radios that changed volume and stations with the turn of a knob, TVs that changed channels with dials. Nobody had a grasp on using a mouse to interact with things on a screen. So logically, you're only left with one choice. Center your design around the one thing that 100% of the human race all understand: physical objects. This is what's known as skeuomorphism, a design style where an object in software mimics its real-world counterpart. In hopes that it would help everyone transition to the new technology, this was the first design trend, and it survived well into 2007, when the first smartphone was revealed to the world. It was finally retired in 2013 by iOS 7, when it was magically decided that people had enough time to transition. But why 2013 out of all the other years it could have happened? This is every iPhone by the end of 2013, and now here they are split into two groups, separated by one number. Interestingly enough, iOS 7 and 8 only support down to iPhone 4, which is right where the line divides.
This is a biggie. Something we call the Retina Display. 4 times as many pixels in the same amount of space. Well, as you can see, we turn on pixels inside that stroke. We can get far more precision the more pixels we have. Now, the Retina Display has 326 pixels per inch. There's never been a display like this on a phone. People haven't even dreamed about a display like this on a phone. But it's more than that. It turns out that there's a magic number right around 300 pixels per inch that when you hold something around 10 or 12 inches away from your eyes is the limit of the human retina to differentiate the pixels.
In an interview with USA Today, Craig Federighi explained that, quote, "Before, the shadowing effect we used was a great way to distract from the limitations of the display. But with a display that's this precise, there's nowhere to hide." Basically, Craig is making the point that skeuomorphic design would look worse as screen sizes increased. He also mentioned that because GPUs have become so much more powerful, it opens up new opportunities and tools to tackle problems in smarter and better ways than before. I can see how what he said makes sense, because there are things that flat design can execute better than skeuomorphic design. Animations, for instance. Here are some examples of animations that would be difficult to execute if you stuck with skeuomorphism. Besides that, flat design is a lot more flexible, since it doesn't have to so strictly resemble physical objects, as well as naturally lending itself to vector graphics, which effortlessly scale to displays of any size. Besides just Apple, it seemed that Microsoft saw the writings on the wall as well, with their switch to the Metro Tiles design, with Windows 8 in 2012.
It's the most popular operating system of all time, I think because of the flexibility that it's shown. Windows has continuously adapted to an always changing technology landscape, even through some big shifts. The shift from client to server computing, the shift from 16 to 32 to 64-bit computing. Windows has even been ported and relevant to other platforms like Itanium, MIPS, PowerPC, Alpha, and now ARM. And I think it's that resiliency that Windows has shown over time that keeps it being very relevant as major shifts happen. The trends that we're facing now have changed. Today we're facing trends around immersive internet computing, ultra-portable devices, and of course touchscreens. So what Windows 8 is, it's a reimagining of Windows for those trends that we're seeing today.
So a large driving force of Windows 8 was multi-platform compatibility, scaling Windows from a large screen to a smaller screen, as well as simplifying the UI. Sounds almost just like what Apple said. However, I wouldn't fault you for thinking it was just a cheap coincidence. Windows was about adapting to tablet sizes, and it wasn't even about phones. So let's take a look at an ice cream sandwich, better known as Android 4.0.
Only 6 months ago, we finished Honeycomb. And when we did, we took that opportunity to really sit back and think about the future of Android. Where do we want to be next year, 5 years, a decade from now? What do we want to stand for? In fact, we asked ourselves for the first time, what is the soul of Android? And to help answer that question, we went and we talked to people from all different walks of life who use all different devices and kinds of devices. We found out mobile technology is absolutely essential to people's lives, and that makes everybody in this room pretty happy. But we also found out that while people like Android, while people need Android, they didn't love Android. People know that Android is powerful, but sometimes they felt really frustrated when they couldn't figure out how to get at that power. We wanted a break with the past. No more of that UI that pretends to be something that it's not, fake wood and fake brushed metal and plastic. But we didn't want something intellectual and sterile where everything looks the same either. We wanted something relevant, emotional, and we looked to the latest trends in graphic design to inspire us. Television motion graphics, web design, and print. And we started by looking at every screen and thinking of it like a magazine layout. Not lists of text with icons where everything's the same, but big, bold pictures with giant headlines that just suck you right into the content. We wanted simple typographic layouts with plenty of white space, eliminating lines and boxes and unnecessary decoration. And we wanted to imbue everything with subtle animation and delightful flourishes to really make Android come alive.
For Samsung, the screen is critical because the experience begins and ends with the display. 80% of people who buy smartphones put display quality at the top of their list in terms of functional needs. And that is precisely the reason why we are rolling out high definition on our highly acclaimed Super AMOLED display on Galaxy Nexus. Super AMOLED is already recognized as the best display in the industry. It produces a color spectrum that exceeds even most televisions, making it the most colorful display on the market.
I think that's conclusive enough. Regardless of how well the vision was executed, Matthias explains it in more depth, citing things like making it easier to use, simpler, more empowering, and in the next moment, highlighting how impressive the new display tech is. So it all came down to massive improvements in display tech that also made it a convenient time to completely rethink your UI. It's a decent theory, but how do we know it isn't just everyone following in Apple's footsteps? It's easy to say they just followed Apple's lead, but it genuinely seems like they all worked on it independently and arrived at their own conclusions. First of all, Android's redesign started in 2011 with Android 3.0 Honeycomb. Microsoft's adventure in flat design started all the way back in 2006 with the Zoom 30. And of course, Apple's iOS 7 released in 2013. Just one glance, and you can see how different yet similar they all are. Android held onto the skeuomorphic S icon designs, but flattened the UI. Microsoft just lost their mind between 2006 and the release of Windows 8 in 2012 and flattened literally everything. And Apple settles for a largely whitish UI, but using color to communicate importance and subtle gradients in icon backgrounds. No matter how it was done, simplicity was the mission. It makes sense, but how do we know it's not like fashion, where it runs in an endless cycle? I don't mean that's a bad theory, but I think there's a fundamental difference that makes that untrue. The difference is that while clothes just need to have 3 to 4 holes cut into it to suffice. If you mess around with the design of a digital medium, it directly impacts functionality. Take this for example. In this newer version of the YouTube Android app, they literally made it harder to swipe away videos you're done watching. Plus, we've actually already looped back. Many design elements that were deemed off-limits back in 2012, like drop shadows, gradients, and even gloss have made their way back. Material Design has several pages dedicated to documenting proper use of shadows and how important they are. Apple's design documents for the macOS recommends you to use gradients for app icon backgrounds. The ripple effect that happens every time you tap anything with Material Design is like a more refined and mature use of gloss. And that's how I would describe digital design today in general. Everything has been refined. We will continue to see exploration into previously discarded design elements and bring them back for today's standards. The so-called flat design is here to stay for as long as we can still use screens. Thanks for watching. Hope you learned something new.